Amidst the music and the laughter of 200 guests, my own son, my James, walked up and whispered in my ear, "Mom, you need to go home. Your dress is overshadowing the bride." I was thrown out of my own son's wedding, all because of a simple family heirloom. That night, the mother's heart inside of me died, but something stronger was born from the ashes. My name is Clara Hayes. I'm 72 years old, and this is my true story from right here in the Shenandoah Valley, Virginia. If your heart tells you that no mother on God's green earth deserves to be treated that way, just keep me in your thoughts, because what happened next, it'll make you believe in justice. Music fades out. That day, the Shenandoah Valley itself seemed to be dressed in its Sunday best. Our farm, Walter's Orchard, the legacy my late husband Walter had poured his sweat and soul into, was just bathed in that honey gold sunlight of a late summer afternoon. The air carried that rich, heady scent of ripe apples mingled with the cinnamon from the wedding cake trial runs, a smell that's been home to me for over 50 years. From the porch, I could see clear across the valley, where the rows of apple trees stood tall and straight like loyal old soldiers, their branches heavy with the promise of a bountiful harvest. We'd been getting ready for this big day for 6 whole months. Everything had to be just right, not for show, you understand, but to show my love for James. We'd strung up golden fairy lights between the old-growth trees, and they twinkled like a man-made sky full of stars once dusk settled in. The long oak tables were covered in cream-colored linens, each with a vase of wildflowers I'd picked myself from the little garden behind the house. A string quartet was playing these beautiful, sweeping classical tunes, the sound of the violin and cello just floating on the breeze, weaving in and out of the rustling leaves. It was a symphony of peace and happiness. I stood there, in front of the big mirror in my bedroom, the same mirror that had watched me go from a young bride to a wife, a mother, and then a widow. And I was wearing the sapphire blue dress. Now, this wasn't just a piece of clothing, it was a treasure. The silk was so soft and shimmering, woven nearly a century ago, but it still looked as brilliant as ever. Its blue was as deep as an August night sky, the kind of blue Walter used to say made my eyes sparkle. My mother wore it on her wedding day, and I wore it on mine, the day I gave my life to Walter. That dress carried the blessings of 3 generations of Hayes women. It held their joys, their sorrows, and their hidden strength. When I put it on, I didn't just feel pretty, I felt wrapped up, protected by the spirits of those who came before me. My silver hair was pinned up in an elegant bun, showing off my neck and the pearl earrings Walter had given me for our 25th anniversary. I looked at that reflection, a 72-year-old woman with the lines of time etched around her eyes, but those eyes still shone with pride and a boundless love. I was ready, not just as the mother of the groom, but as the matriarch of this land, ready to welcome a new member into our family. My James. He was 45, a grown man, but in my eyes he'd always be that little boy with the sandy hair and wide eyes, trailing after me in the orchard. After Walter passed on 20 years ago, it was just the two of us, leaning on each other, shouldering the weight of the farm through the hard winters and the dry summers. He was a good son. He'd turned down a big city job to come back, saying, "My place is here, Mom, with you and Walter's Orchard." My heart just swelled with happiness when he said that. We worked together, shared late dinners, and watched the sun set over the valley from that old oak swing Walter had built. I truly thought nothing could ever break that bond. Until Amber Collins came along. I first met Amber 2 years ago, when James brought her home. She was a real estate agent from Richmond, a city woman through and through. She was beautiful, sharp, and polished, with perfectly styled blonde hair and designer clothes without a single wrinkle. She talked about investment properties, profit margins, and niche markets with this incredible confidence. The first time she stepped into our old farmhouse, I saw her eyes scan everything, not with admiration, but with appraisal. The stone fireplace my Walter's grandfather built by hand, the cherry wood dining set Walter himself had made, the faded black and white photos of generations of Hyacinths on the wall, to her. It all just seemed to be vintage items with decorative potential. I tried to push that uneasy feeling down. I told myself I was just being an old-fashioned old woman, that the world was different now, and I needed to be more open-minded. James loved her. He was completely smitten, blind to anything else. The way he looked at Amber was something I'd never seen before, a kind of absolute adoration. So, For my son's happiness, I opened my arms to her. I taught her how to make my family's secret apple pie recipe, showed her how to tell the different apple varieties apart, and told her stories about Walter and the history of the farm. She always smiled and nodded, but I felt like my words just slid right off her glossy surface, never sinking in. And then, the wedding day arrived. As I stepped onto the lawn where the party was, a gentle breeze caught the hem of my sapphire dress, making it sway. The afternoon sun hit the fabric, and that blue just came alive, more vibrant than ever. Many old friends, neighbors who'd known our family for decades, came up to say hello. "Oh, Clara, you look absolutely beautiful," exclaimed Mrs. Peterson, my best friend from high school. "The legendary dress. I remember your mother wearing it. You look so regal, every bit the lady of the manor." Mr. Henderson, who helped Walter start the local Apple Growers Association, nodded in agreement. If Walter could see you now, he'd be so proud. Those kind words warmed my soul. I felt like I belonged there, that my presence was an essential part of the day. I looked for James and Amber. They were in the center of it all, hand in hand, accepting congratulations. James looked so handsome in his charcoal gray suit. His smile was wide, but there was something tight around his eyes. Amber, of course, was flawless. Her pure white wedding gown, which probably cost as much as our entire apple harvest, clung to her slender frame. I walked over, wanting to hug my son and congratulate my new daughter-in-law again. "You two make such a beautiful couple," I said, my voice thick with emotion. James turned, about to say something, but Amber was quicker. "Thank you, Clara," she said, a smile on her lips, but her eyes as cold as ice. "You're also very striking." The way she said striking was odd. She wasn't looking at me, but at my blue dress, a quick, dismissive glance filled with irritation. I felt a little chill run down my spine. I tried to ignore it and started chatting with some cousins, but I couldn't help but notice. Every so often I'd catch Amber's eyes on me, and each time she would turn and whisper something in James's ear. At first, he'd just shake his head, a forced smile on his face, but after a while I saw that smile fade. His expression grew tense, conflicted. The way he looked at me wasn't with warmth anymore, but with a kind of pained awkwardness. The real nightmare began when the band started a soft waltz. I was talking with old Mr. Bennett, our family lawyer and Walter's closest friend. Suddenly, I saw Amber pull James over to a secluded spot behind an old apple tree. This time, their conversation looked heated. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw her gestures. She crossed her arms, shook her head, and at one point, she jabbed a finger in my direction. James just stood there, his hands hanging limp at his sides, his head bowed like a scolded child. And then I saw it. Amber turned on her heel and walked away, leaving him alone. He just stood there for a long moment, running a hand through his hair. He took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and started walking toward me. Every step he took seemed to be weighted down with lead. His face was pale, his jaw set. I knew that look. It was the look he got as a little boy whenever he knew he'd done something wrong but didn't want to admit it. My heart started to pound in my chest. A terrible feeling began to creep into my bones. Mr. Bennett must have sensed it too, because he gently put a hand on my arm, as if to steady me. James stopped right in front of me. He couldn't meet my eyes. His gaze darted around, finally settling on his own shoes. "Mom?" he began, his voice hoarse, almost a whisper. "What is it, son?" I asked, trying to keep my own voice steady. He hesitated, as if picking his words from a minefield. This is hard to say." He shot a quick glance over at Amber, who was watching from a distance, her face a blank mask. "Amber, she feels that." He trailed off, unable to finish. I waited. The whole world seemed to hold its breath. The violins were still playing, the guests were still laughing, but for me, it all went silent. There was only me and my son, standing before me with some invisible, terrible weight on his shoulders. "She feels what, James?" I urged gently. He took another deep breath and finally looked up, and the look in his eyes was so foreign it broke my heart. "She feels that your dress, it's overshadowing the bride. Everyone keeps looking at you. That blue is just too overwhelming." It felt like a physical blow to my chest. Overwhelming? This dress, this symbol of our family, of love and legacy, was seen as overwhelming? I felt a flush of heat rise to my face, but I held it back. For my son, for his big day. "Oh," was all I could manage. I didn't mean for that. If you'd like, I can go inside and change. I have a beige dress in the car." I tried to smile, to show him it was all right, that I'd do whatever it took to make his day perfect. But James shook his head, his expression hardened, turned cold. "No, Mom," his voice was brutally final. "That won't be enough. It's better if you just go home." "What?" I couldn't believe my ears. The words were a knife straight to the heart. Go home? Leave my own son's wedding? "Amber, she's under a lot of stress," James continued, his voice flat as if he were reciting lines he'd been fed. "She says your presence is putting pressure on her, that you're always judging her." I looked around. The party was still going on. People were laughing, raising their glasses, completely unaware of the tragedy unfolding just a few feet away. I looked at the son I had given birth to, the boy I had spent my life loving and protecting, and I didn't recognize him. Before me stood a stranger, a man with empty eyes and a heart that belonged to someone else. My voice trembled, but I tried to cling to one last shred of hope. "James, I'm your mother. I planned this wedding. I paid for half of everything here." That was a mistake. My words seemed to ignite some pent-up anger in him. His face turned red. "And you think that gives you the right to ruin my wife's big day?" he shouted. His shout was like a crack of thunder. The entire party fell silent. The music stopped. Every conversation died. Nearly 200 pairs of eyes turned to stare at us. Shame, humiliation, and a pain so deep it stole my breath washed over me. And then, in that dead silence, James delivered the final blow, loud and clear for everyone to hear. "Get out, Mom. My wife doesn't want you here." Something inside me shattered. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even sadness. It was a profound, hollow emptiness. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just gave a small, quiet nod. The world around me blurred. I looked my son in the eyes one last time, searching for a flicker of the James I knew, but there was nothing, only cold, empty distance. I turned and picked up my clutch purse from a table. Mr. Bennett came over, his face etched with concern. "Clara, let me—" "It's all right, Bennett," I cut him off, my voice terrifyingly calm. "I'm just a little tired. I'm going to head home and rest." I walked away, my back straight, my head held high. I could feel the eyes on me, pitying, curious, judging, but I didn't care. I walked past the tables, past the familiar faces that now looked like strangers. Not a single person stopped me. Not a single person followed. The familiar dirt path from the party back to the main house felt like it stretched on for miles. The music had started up again, a weak and hollow sound, a clumsy attempt to patch over the gaping wound that had just been torn open. I stepped into the empty house, and its silence wrapped around me like a cold blanket. I went straight upstairs to the bedroom, the room I had shared with Walter for 40 years. I stood before the mirror again. The woman in the reflection was the same magnificent sapphire dress, the same silver hair pinned up, but her eyes were dead now. The pride was gone. The joy was gone. All that was left was an ocean of pain. Carefully, I took off the dress. I undid each button, one by one. I folded it with a kind of reverence, smoothing out every inch of silk, as if performing a final ritual. I placed it back in its cedar chest, where it had rested for years. Closing that lid felt like closing a chapter of my life, a chapter full of love and hope that had just ended in utter humiliation. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the armchair by the window, looking out at the orchard where the party carried on. The lights still twinkled, the music still played, and every now and then, I'd hear a burst of laughter. My son was out there with his new wife, starting his new life. A life without me. 3 days. 3 days that felt like 3 centuries passed in a heavy, suffocating silence. Our home, once filled with laughter and stories, was now home only to the steady, metronomic tick-tock of the old grandfather clock in the hall. It was a maddeningly monotonous sound, as if it were counting down the beats to a family's dissolution. I moved through those days like a ghost in my own house. I still woke with the first light, still brewed a large pot of coffee out of habit, still walked among the apple trees, feeling the dew on the grass. The routines were the same, but nothing was normal. The pain of the wedding night didn't fade. It just soaked quietly into the floorboards and the furniture, turning sweet memories into bitter reminders. I was waiting. A part of me, the weak, motherly part, kept listening for the familiar crunch of James's pickup truck on the gravel drive. I pictured him walking in, his face full of regret, saying, "Mom, I'm so sorry." I'd rehearsed it in my head 100 times. I would hug him, I would forgive him, and we would put this nightmare behind us. But the truck never came. Only silence answered my foolish hopes. On the morning of the 4th day, as I sat at the kitchen table staring out the window, a cold cup of coffee in my hands, the phone rang. My heart seized. It was James's number. A tiny flicker of hope, weak but persistent, made my hand tremble as I picked it up. "Hello," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "Hi, Mom." James's voice on the other end was terrifyingly distant. There was no warmth, no hesitant apology. It was cold, clipped, and full of a borrowed confidence. I could hear Amber murmuring something in the background, like a puppeteer directing her marionette. "Are you doing okay?" he asked, a hollow, perfunctory question that served as a cold open to a calculated assault. "I'm still breathing," I replied, unable to hide the bitterness in my voice. "What is it, James?" He cleared his throat, as if to steady himself. "Mom, Amber, and I have had a very productive discussion about the future." He stressed the word productive. A businessman's word, a word the old James would never have used. "We've realized that Walter's Orchard is being, well, under-leveraged." I said nothing, my knuckles white as I gripped the phone. I knew where this was going. This wasn't a call to check in, this was a business proposal, or rather an ultimatum. "We've drawn up a plan," he continued, his speech becoming smoother, as if he were reading from a script. "A plan to optimize the asset's value." There was that word again, asset. The home my ancestors built, the land Walter bled for, was now just a lifeless asset in my son's mouth. "We're planning to convert the property into a high-end boutique resort, a wellness spa with an agricultural experience, a luxury destination for city tourists. Can you picture it? It'll be called the Hayes Estates and Spa." I almost let out a laugh, a sour, bitter laugh. The name was preposterous, foreign, it didn't belong here. "No, James, I can't picture it, and I don't want to." There was a pause on the other end. I could hear Amber's angry whispering. Then James spoke again, his voice now stripped of all patience. "You need to be more forward-thinking, Mom. This is the future. We are sitting on a gold mine, and you're treating it like some dusty old museum. This is a multi-million-dollar opportunity." "Whose gold mine, James?" I asked him point blank. "Yours and Amber's? Or our families, including the ones in the ground who left us this land?" "Don't bring the past into this, Mom," he snapped. "This is about the here and now." "Then say it," I challenged. "What do you want from me?" And then came the brazen demand. "For starters, we'll need the keys to the main office and the large barn. Amber has already been in touch with a team of appraisers and architects from Richmond. They're coming this weekend to survey the entire property. They'll need access to all the books, deeds, and zoning maps." The blood in my veins turned to ice. The keys. They weren't just pieces of metal. That ring of keys had hung on an old hook by the kitchen door for as long as I could remember. It held the key to the main house, to the office where Walter kept every important document, to the barn with all the farm equipment, and even the small special key to the cider cellar, where the most valuable batches were aged. That key ring was a symbol of authority, of control, of the stewardship Walter had entrusted to me. To hand it over would be to surrender the very soul of this farm to outsiders. "No," I said, and my voice was no longer trembling. It was as hard and cold as steel. "What did you say?" James asked, as if he couldn't believe what he'd just heard. I said, "No," I repeated, enunciating every letter. "No appraisers and no architects will set foot on this land to measure or assess a single thing, and I will not be handing over those keys to anyone." "You don't have that right!" he yelled into the phone, his anger now completely unleashed. "I'm an heir! I own 50%! "But I have lifelong stewardship," I shot back, my voice dangerously calm. That was your father's final wish, James, and I will honor that wish until my last breath. Your father left you a legacy to cherish and continue, not a commodity to sell off to the highest bidder. Dad's wishes are outdated, he screamed, his rage making him lose all reason. Dad's been gone for 20 years. You can't keep living in the past. That last sentence was the final hammer blow, shattering any illusion I had left about my son. He didn't just want the farm, he wanted to erase his father's memory. This conversation is over, I said, my voice like ice. If you want to speak to me as my son, you come home, and you come alone. If you're calling as Amber Collins' business partner, then don't ever call again. I hung up before he could say another word. The kitchen was silent, but it wasn't the silence of grief anymore. It was the silence before a storm. I stood up, walked to the old hook, and took down the ring of keys. I closed my hand around them. The cold metal bit into my palm, but it sent a strange strength through me. I felt the weight of my responsibility, of the promise I'd made to Walter in his final days. "I'll take care of it, Walter," I had whispered. "I won't let anyone destroy it." I knew this call was just the opening shot. They wouldn't stop. Amber wasn't the type to give up easily. She had tasted victory on the wedding night, and she would press her attack. She would use James, use his blind love and his weakness, as her weapon. And me? I had this land, my memories, and a last will and testament, but I realized Walter hadn't left me defenseless. He had known. He had seen the potential weakness in the son he loved so dearly. That will wasn't just a legal document, it was a shield he had carefully forged to protect me. From that day on, I began to prepare for war. I was no longer a grieving mother. I had become a sentinel. I spent the afternoon in Walter's office, a place I rarely entered because it held too many memories. But today, I entered with a purpose. I organized every piece of paper, the land deeds, decades of tax receipts, the logs from every harvest, and most importantly, the original copy of the will. I read it over and over, absorbing every clause, every word, trying to understand the deeper intentions Walter had woven into it. I knew that Amber, as a real estate agent, would look for legal loopholes, for any weakness she could exploit. I had to be one step ahead of her. That evening, I called Mr. Bennett. I didn't cry or complain about my pain. I just said decisively, "Bennett, I'm going to need you. Get ready. A storm is coming." On the other end of the line, Mr. Bennett was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "I've been ready for a long time, Clara. Walter gave me very clear instructions." His words made me realize something. Walter hadn't just left me a shield. He had also left me loyal allies. As night fell, I no longer felt alone in that big house. I felt Walter's presence everywhere, in the creak of the floorboards, in the whistle of the wind through the eaves. It was as if he were standing right behind me, a hand on my shoulder, giving me strength. This was going to be a long and painful fight. It would test every limit of my love, my forgiveness, and my endurance. But I wasn't afraid anymore, because I knew what I was fighting for. I wasn't just protecting a piece of property. I was protecting the soul of a family, the legacy of a great love, and for that I was prepared to fight to the very end. The keyring wasn't on the hook anymore. I had put it on an old leather cord and tucked it under my shirt. It rested against my chest, cold, heavy, and powerful. A constant reminder of my vow. The weeks that followed the phone call passed in a cold, silent war. There were no more threats, no more brazen demands, just a vast, empty space, a calculated, unnerving silence that was more frightening than any argument. I knew this wasn't surrender. This was preparation. Amber was marshaling her forces, sharpening her legal weapons, and I had no doubt she was continuing to inject her venom of greed into James's mind. Every day, when I looked out at the empty gravel road, I was no longer waiting for a repentant son to come home. I was waiting for the enemy to advance. This passive waiting was wearing me down. Grief and anger, if not channeled into action, will eat you alive from the inside out. I couldn't just sit here and let them choose the battlefield. I needed to understand my opponent better, to look the snake in the eye to measure its poison. I needed a chance to confirm my suspicions, to know for sure if James was completely lost to me or if there was still a flicker of the boy I raised left inside him. And so, An idea took root in my mind, a risky plan, a game where I had to wager my own heart. I would invite them to dinner. To an outsider, this would look like an act of surrender, a weak peace offering from a lonely old mother. And that was exactly the impression I wanted to give. Pride and arrogance often go hand in hand, and I was betting on Amber's arrogance. I picked up the phone and dialed James's number. My heart still skipped a beat when I heard his familiar voice. "Hello? James, dear, it's Mom," I said, forcing a warmth and a touch of weariness into my voice. There was a slight pause on the other end. I could just picture him, holding a hand over the receiver, looking to Amber for instructions. "Yes, Mom, I'm here. I've been doing a lot of thinking," I continued, choosing my words carefully. Maybe I was too harsh. I didn't give you and Amber a fair chance. I'm sorry." The apology felt like swallowing broken glass, but I got it down. "I want us to start over. Would you and Amber come for dinner this weekend? I'll make that honey-glazed roast beef you loved so much when you were a boy." I mentioned that dish on purpose. It wasn't just food, it was a memory, an invisible thread connecting James to his childhood, to the happy days before Amber. I heard a slight hesitation in his breathing. I knew I'd hit a soft spot. Let me ask Amber," he said, his voice a little flustered. I could hear muffled whispering. Amber would be suspicious, of course. A fox like her wouldn't easily believe such a sudden change of heart. But then I heard her voice, faint but calculating. "Go ahead and agree. This is a good opportunity." A good opportunity for what? To continue her campaign of persuasion? Or to do some reconnaissance? Either way, my trap was set. "Yes, Mom, we'll be there," James said, his borrowed confidence returning. "Saturday night." "Wonderful," I said, ending the call with a smile they couldn't see. The chess match had begun. All day that Saturday, I played the part of the happy homemaker, but this was no simple act of love. It was a stage production. I took out my best Limoges china, the set I only used for Christmas, and polished every piece until it shone. I laid out the lace tablecloth my mother had embroidered by hand, its intricate white rose pattern as complex as a woman's mind. I placed a vase of white peonies in the center of the table, a flower that symbolizes nobility, but also, sometimes, coldness. From the kitchen, the aroma of the honey-glazed beef and herbs filled the house, a scent designed to bypass all defenses and stir up memories of a peaceful past. I was cooking with my whole heart, but with a cold mind. Every ingredient, every action, was part of the theater I was creating. I wanted to build a space of warmth, an illusion of a happy family, a place where my enemy would let down her guard. At 7 o'clock sharp, the headlights of their luxury SUV swept across the front yard. I took a deep breath, put on my mask of a cheerful mother, and opened the door. James got out first. He was wearing an expensive dress shirt and slacks, looking more like he'd just come from a business meeting than from a family dinner. His face was tense, his smile strained. Amber emerged from the passenger side, perfect as always in a simple but elegant black silk dress, carrying a bottle of fine wine. "Hello, Clara," she said, her voice as sweet as honey. She gave me a brief, airy hug that smelled of expensive perfume. "Thank you so much for having us. It's lovely to be here." "Come in, you two," I said, my own smile perfectly practiced. "Dinner's just about ready." The meal unfolded in a strange atmosphere, a mixture of forced attempts at reconciliation and a silent, simmering confrontation. James tried the hardest to keep things normal. He told old jokes and brought up childhood memories. "Remember that time I climbed the tallest apple tree and was too scared to come down?" he said with a loud laugh. "You had to get the big ladder and talk me down for a whole hour." "Of course, I remember." I smiled, a genuine smile for a fleeting second. "You were crying so loud you scared the birds out of their nests." But Amber quickly steered the conversation back to her own agenda. "This house is so well built," she said, tapping a manicured nail on the cherry wood tabletop. "This wood must be a century old. The upkeep must be very expensive." "It's a part of our family's history, Amber," I replied gently, "and you can't put a price on history." She didn't argue. She just smiled and moved on, but I knew she was taking mental notes. And the property taxes in this area must be quite high. For a parcel as large as Walter's Orchard, I imagine the county has some pretty strict zoning regulations. She was clever. Too clever. Every question was perfectly disguised as the innocent curiosity of a new daughter-in-law trying to learn about her husband's family. But I, with the sensitivity of someone who has lived a full life, could hear what was left unsaid. She wasn't asking, she was gathering intelligence. When I brought out the roast, James let out an emotional sigh. "Oh, Mom, that smell, nobody makes it like you." He ate with gusto, like a little boy reunited with his favorite meal. For a moment, I saw the old James, my simple, honest son. But then, a quick glance from Amber was enough to pull him back to the present. "It's delicious," Amber said after taking a delicate bite. "Though perhaps a little heavy on the honey, I'm trying to cut back on sugar." After the main course, just as I was about to bring out the apple pie, Amber suddenly winced and put a hand to her forehead. "Oh, I don't know why, but I have a bit of a headache. It must be the change in the weather." "Would you like some aspirin?" I asked, feigning concern. "Oh, no, thank you," she said with a weak smile. "I think I just need to splash some water on my face and rest for a minute. You two go on and talk." She stood up and walked toward the hallway. James watched her go, a worried look on his face. "She works too hard," he said to me. "Always stressed." I just nodded, but inside, an alarm bell was ringing. I knew Amber. She was not the type of woman to be felled by a simple headache. This was an excuse. But for what? We continued to talk, or rather, I listened as James spoke about their work and their plans, but my mind was elsewhere. I was listening for other sounds in the house, the ticking of the clock, the creak of the floorboards, and the suspicious silence from down the hall. 5 minutes, 10, 15 minutes passed. Amber still hadn't returned. "Let me go check on Amber," I said, getting to my feet. "Maybe she does need that aspirin." "Yeah, could you, Mom?" James said, still completely oblivious. I walked into the hallway. The bathroom door was ajar, the light off. No one was in there. My heart began to beat faster. I crept down the hall, past my own bedroom, and then I saw it. A sliver of light from under the door of Walter's office, the room at the very end of the hall, a room that was supposed to be off limits. Holding my breath, I walked softly on the old runner rug. I didn't push the door open right away. I pressed my ear against the heavy oak, and then I heard it. A tiny, almost imperceptible sound in the quiet house, but to me, it was as loud as a thunderclap, the soft, dry click of a smartphone camera. Coldly and deliberately, I grabbed the doorknob and shoved the door open. It swung inward to reveal Amber, standing in the middle of the room with her back to me. She was holding her phone up, pointed directly at the wall where a large, hand-drawn plat map of the entire farm, an old map from Walter's grandfather's time, was framed. Her phone screen was still illuminated, showing the picture she had just taken. At the sound of the door, she jumped, her shoulders tensing. She spun around, her face pale with shock, but the panic lasted only a second. Almost instantly, she composed herself, a shift in demeanor so fast it was stunning. "Oh, Clara," she exclaimed, her voice a performance of cheerful surprise. "You startled me." She quickly slipped the phone into her purse. "I'm so sorry. I was just passing by and saw the door was open a crack. This room is just fascinating. Walter must have been a very organized and visionary man. This door is always locked," I said, my voice as cold as ice, my eyes locked on hers. "Oh, is it?" She blinked, the smile never leaving her face. "I must have been mistaken. I was just so drawn to all the antiques in here. So much character. I especially love that map. It's like a work of art." She was a brilliant actress, not a stutter, not a misstep, but I had seen what I needed to see. I had the proof I was looking for. "Dessert is getting cold," I said, showing no emotion. "We should get back to the table." "Yes, of course," she chirped, breezing past me as if nothing had happened. When we got back to the dining room, James looked at us quizzically. "Everything okay?" "Perfectly fine, honey," Amber said, sitting down and placing a loving hand on his arm. "I was just admiring your father's office. What a wonderful space." We finished the apple pie in an awkward silence. James tried to start a few more conversations, but the air was too heavy now. I just sat there, quietly observing Amber. She was now even more sweet and attentive, as if to cover her tracks. But to me, her smile now looked like a smirk, and her sweet words sounded like the hiss of a snake. They made their excuses to leave soon after. "Thanks for dinner, Mom," James said at the door, still unaware of the drama that had played out. "Thank you so much, Clara," Amber said, giving me another one of her fake hugs. "We simply must do this again soon." I just nodded, watching them go. I stood on the porch as their car disappeared down the drive until there was nothing left but the darkness and the chirping of the crickets. I went back inside. I didn't clear the table. I didn't wash the dishes. I walked straight to Walter's office. I turned on the light, and the warm yellow glow filled the room. But it didn't feel warm anymore. This room, Walter's sanctuary, had been violated. I didn't need to search. I knew Amber was too smart to have physically taken anything. But I checked anyway. I pulled open the desk drawer. Everything was there. Tax documents, ledgers, old contracts. But one green file folder, the one containing the most critical land ownership documents, had been moved. A shift of mere millimeters from its original position, a disturbance only I, who had dusted this room every week for 20 years, would ever notice. That was enough. My theory was confirmed. This was no longer speculation. It was fact. Amber wasn't just trying to persuade me. She was gathering ammunition. She was preparing for a legal battle, and she was willing to do anything, including sneaking around like a thief in the night to get what she wanted. I stood there in the middle of the room, feeling the silence around me. My dinner party had failed as a reconciliation, just as I knew it would, but I hadn't lost. On the contrary, I had won an important victory. I had forced my enemy to show her hand. I now knew her methods, and I knew the depths of her ruthlessness. After that fateful dinner, another silence fell. But this time, it wasn't the silence of a cold war. It was the tense, heavy stillness before a hurricane makes landfall. I knew Amber knew that I had caught her, even if I hadn't said a word. And a cornered animal doesn't retreat, it attacks. I didn't know where the next blow would come from or when, but I was ready. I spent my days going over every legal paper with Mr. Bennett, reinforcing every line of defense Walter had so carefully built. About a week later, the attack came, but not in a way I expected. It wasn't a letter from a lawyer or an angry phone call from James. It came in the form of a strangely polite text message from Amber herself. "Good morning, Clara. I hope you've had a good week. I have a few ideas I'd like to discuss with you privately, just the two of us. Would you be free for coffee on Thursday morning? Perhaps at the Daily Grind in town." A direct invitation. No more hiding behind James. The fox was coming out of its den. Her audacity was both shocking and, in a strange way, impressive. She knew that I knew, and instead of denying it, she was choosing a direct confrontation. This was a dangerous escalation. I could have refused, but curiosity and a warrior's instinct wouldn't let me. I needed to hear what she had to say. I needed to look her in the eye when she made her demands. "Very well, Amber. I'll see you at 10, I texted back, keeping it short and emotionless. That Thursday morning, I chose my outfit with purpose. I didn't wear my usual gardening clothes. I wore a pair of crisp beige trousers, an ivory silk blouse, and the tweed blazer Walter had bought me on a trip to Scotland. I put my hair up, wore my pearl earrings, and put on just a touch of lavender water. I wasn't trying to look younger or richer. I wanted to look exactly like who I was, a matriarch, composed, in control, and not to be trifled with. The keys were still there, safe under my blouse, a cold talisman against my skin. The Daily Grind was a small, cozy coffee shop that was always bustling. When I walked in, Amber was already there, seated at a table by the window, the best vantage point in the room. She was wearing a charcoal gray power suit, her blonde hair in a neat chignon. She looked less like a daughter-in-law meeting for coffee and more like a powerful executive about to close a major deal. A slim laptop and a glossy file folder were placed neatly beside her coffee cup. She had come prepared for a presentation. "Clara," she smiled, standing as I approached. Her smile was perfect, but her eyes were sharp as glass. "Thank you for coming." "Amber," I said, sitting opposite her. I didn't order anything. I had no intention of making this a long meeting. What was so important that it couldn't be said over the phone? My blunt question didn't seem to faze her one bit. "I've always believed that important matters should be discussed in person, face to face," she said, her tone all business. "It shows respect, and I have a great deal of respect for you, Clara." The hypocrisy of it all was enough to make my stomach turn, but I kept my face as still as a frozen pond. "Then let's get straight to the point," I said. Amber nodded. She opened her laptop and spun the screen to face me. On it was an incredibly professional 3D animated video. A virtual drone flew over our farm, but it was completely transformed. The ancient apple orchards were gone, replaced by rows of luxury cabins, an infinity pool overlooking the valley, a tennis court, and a magnificent main lodge with a spa and a high-end restaurant. The name, The Hayes Estates and Spa, flashed in gold letters in the corner of the screen. "This," she said, her voice brimming with pride, "is the future. A project worth at least $15 million upon completion, with a potential annual profit of up to $2 million. I stared at the screen, a cold rage coiling deep in my chest. They didn't just want to sell the land. They wanted to erase it, to bulldoze every memory, every bit of heritage, and build some soulless monument to extravagance on its grave. "I've been working on this for months," Amber continued, oblivious to my dead silence. She opened the file folder, revealing charts, figures, market analyses. "I've already been in contact with Stonebridge Holdings, an investment group. They are very, very interested. They're prepared to offer $4.5 million to acquire the entire property, effective immediately." She slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a formal offer, complete with the firm's letterhead and signature. "I know what you're thinking," she said, her voice suddenly becoming soft and full of phony understanding. "You're attached to this place. It's full of memories. I get that, but we have to be realistic, Clara. You're 72 years old. Managing a farm this large all by yourself is just too much. It's hard work, the maintenance costs are high, the health risks. Have you thought about what would happen if you were to fall one day, and no one was there to help you?" She was painting a picture of a lonely, frail, and helpless old woman. An image she wanted me to believe, wanted me to become. "With this money," she said, tapping the $4.5 million figure, "you could do anything you want. You could travel the world. You could buy a luxury condo overlooking the ocean in Sarasota, Florida. Think of the warm climate, the community of other retirees, the 24/7 healthcare services. You could finally enjoy your golden years without a single thing to worry about." She paused, waiting for my reaction. Her eyes were full of expectation, a certainty that no old person could possibly refuse such an attractive offer. I looked her right in the eye, and for the first time, I let my contempt show. "Sarasota, Florida?" I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "You really think you can buy my soul with a retirement condo and a little sunshine?" The smile on Amber's face tightened. "This isn't about buying souls, Clara. This is a smart business decision, a decision for James's future and for your own well-being. Don't you dare use James as a shield, and don't pretend you care about my health," I said, my voice turning to steel. "Let's speak to each other like adults. You want this land, you want the money it represents, and you see me as an obstacle that needs to be removed." The mask finally fell. The sweetness vanished, replaced by a cold, ruthless expression. "If you want to be direct," she said, leaning back in her chair and crossing her arms, "then fine. Yes, you are an obstacle, a stubborn, outdated, and selfish obstacle. You're clinging to a dying legacy and holding your son back from the future he deserves." "The future he deserves, or the future you want for him?" I shot back. "It's the same thing," she said, her voice rising. "I love James, and I want what's best for him, something a mother who's stuck living in the past could never give him. Is your love measured in dollars and square footage?" Amber let out a dry, contemptuous laugh. "Oh, don't you dare preach morality to me, Clara. The world runs on money, not on fairy tales about love and legacy. You've lived long enough to know that." She pushed the offer toward me again. "This is your last chance to walk away from this gracefully. Take it, sign the papers, and this can all be over. You'll have your money, we'll have our future. Everybody wins." "And if I refuse?" I asked, my voice strangely calm. Amber's eyes turned to ice. "Then we'll have no other choice," she said, her voice laced with threat. "We'll take you to court. We'll prove that you are no longer mentally competent to manage this estate. We have expert reports, we have witnesses to your erratic behavior." The court isn't going to side with a sentimental old woman who's actively damaging the financial interests of a rightful heir. In the end, you'll lose everything. Not just the farm, but your dignity too, and you won't get a single penny. It was a declaration of war, a raw and brutal ultimatum. She had shed every last bit of pretense, revealing the true face of a predator. I looked at her for a long moment, staring deep into those cold blue eyes that held not a shred of humanity. And then, I did something she never expected. I smiled. A real smile, not of sarcasm, but of pity. "You're a sad creature, Amber," I said softly. "You have everything: beauty, intelligence, ambition. But you're missing the most important thing: you have no roots. You don't understand the value of things that can't be bought with money. You look at Walter's orchard, and you just see dollar signs. I look at it, and I see a lifetime. I see my husband's love in every tree. I hear my son's laughter on every breeze. You might be able to take this land from me, but you will never, ever have that." I stood up, adjusting my jacket. My answer, now and forever, is no. I placed a $5 bill on the table for a cup of coffee I never drank. "Thank you for showing me your true colors," I said. "It makes things much simpler." I turned and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving Amber sitting alone with her multi-million-dollar plans and a face pale with fury. As I stepped out into the fresh morning air, I didn't feel afraid. I didn't even feel angry anymore. I just felt a fierce, burning resolve. This fight was no longer about keeping a house. It was about defending my very soul and everything I believed in and loved. Leaving the coffee shop, I didn't drive straight home. Amber's threat, while it didn't scare me, haunted me. "Will prove that you are no longer mentally competent." That line cut deeper than any insult. It wasn't just a legal tactic, it was a vicious assault on my dignity, on my very identity, an attempt to paint me as a senile old woman in the eyes of the law and in the eyes of my son. I knew Amber wasn't bluffing. She had the cunning and the resources to make that threat a reality. Instead of turning toward the farm, I steered in the other direction, toward Mr. Bennett's small, old-fashioned law office on Main Street. I needed an ally. I needed a clear head and years of experience to analyze the situation. I needed Walter's best friend. Mr. Bennett's office was just as it had been for 20 years, filled with the smell of old paper, the worn leather of the armchairs, and the faint, comforting scent of pipe tobacco. It was the smell of trust and stability. Mr. Bennett, with his shock of white hair and thick glasses, sat behind a desk buried in paperwork. When he saw me, he looked up, and his tired eyes shone with genuine concern. "Clara," he said, getting up and coming around the desk to take my arm. "You don't look well. What's happened?" I sank into the cracked leather armchair across from him. I didn't beat around the bush. I told him everything about my meeting with Amber, leaving out no detail: the slick 3D video, the $4.5 million offer, and the final, cruel threat to declare me incompetent. Through it all, Mr. Bennett just listened silently. He didn't interrupt, just nodded occasionally, his face growing more and more grave. His long, thin fingers were steepled on the desk, his eyes looking off into the distance as if he were calculating something. When I finished, a heavy silence filled the room, broken only by the ticking of the old clock on the wall. "That girl," Mr. Bennett finally said, his voice low and full of contempt. "She's not just greedy, she's evil." "She'll do it, Bennett," I said, my own voice laced with anxiety. "She'll hire the best lawyers, the most unscrupulous doctors. They'll twist everything, turn every time I forget a neighbor's name or misplace my keys into a symptom of Alzheimer's. They will destroy me." Mr. Bennett didn't answer right away. He stood and walked over to an old steel filing cabinet in the corner. He ran his hand over the rusted drawers, stopping at one labeled Hayes, Walter, and Clara. He pulled a small key from his vest pocket and carefully unlocked it. Inside were dozens of faded manila folders. He pulled out the thickest one, the cover of which read, "Last Will and Testament, Walter Hayes." He brought the file back to the desk and laid it down with a certain reverence. "Walter was a very careful man, Clara," he said, patting the old cover. "He was also the smartest friend I ever had. He loved you and James more than anything in this world, but he wasn't a dreamer. He understood human nature, understood that love can sometimes be clouded by greed." He opened the file. Inside was the will I'd read many times, along with countless other related papers. I remember the day Walter came in to finalize this will like it was yesterday, just a few months before he passed. Mr. Bennet recounted, his eyes looking at a point in the past. He sat right where you're sitting. We spent a whole afternoon going over every single line. There were clauses in there that, at the time, I thought were a bit excessive, even paranoid, but he insisted on them. He said, "Just trust me, Bennet. This is a fortress. I'm building a fortress to protect Clara." Hearing those words, a powerful emotion swelled inside me. Walter, my dear husband, gone from this earth for 20 years, was still here protecting me. "A fortress?" I asked, my voice choking up. "Exactly, Mr. Bennet said, turning the yellowed pages. "There's no secret letter, Clara. Walter's genius is right here, hidden in plain sight, in the dry language of the law, engineered with absolute precision." He put on his reading glasses and began to show me things I'd never noticed. "Here, you see this. The standard clause. James inherits 50% of the estate's value, you inherit the other 50%. But right after, in Article 4, Section B, Walter added this: the lifelong right to manage, operate, and make all decisions pertaining to the Walters Orchard Farm, including but not limited to its sale, lease, mortgage, or change in land use, shall belong solely to Mrs. Clara Hayes and cannot be vetoed by any other heir." "I knew about that part," I said. "It's why I refused them." "Correct." Mr. Bennet nodded. "That's the first wall of the fortress, but Walter knew that wall could be attacked. Amber would argue that your management is damaging the heir's asset value, and that's their grounds to sue, but Walter saw that coming too." He flipped to another page. "Now listen closely. Article 7, Addendum A. This deals with the valuation of the property. Walter defined the value of Walter's Orchard, not just by its market price for land and real estate. He added a very specific definition: the value of the cultural and historical legacy of the Hayes family, and more importantly, he appointed a 3-person committee to appraise this intangible value in the event of a dispute. That committee consists of Mrs. Peterson, the principal of the town's elementary school, Mr. Henderson, the president of the Apple Growers Association, and me. I was stunned. Mrs. Peterson and Mr. Henderson. Our closest friends, people who understood the true worth of the farm better than anyone. Walter had chosen his most loyal allies to be the judges. "Amber can hire a dozen appraisers from New York City," Mr. Bennet said with a small smile. "But they can only appraise the dirt. They can't put a price on history." This committee would submit a report stating that turning the farm into a resort would completely destroy its legacy value, and therefore, your actions to protect the property are perfectly reasonable. Tears started to stream down my cheeks. They weren't tears of sorrow anymore, but of gratitude and awe. Walter, he had thought of everything. "But that's not even the best part," Mr. Bennet continued, a spark of excitement in his voice now. "That's just the second wall. This is the killing blow. This is the part I called paranoid all those years ago." He turned to one of the last pages, to a small clause buried behind long paragraphs about taxes and legal procedures. A clause any inexperienced lawyer might skim right over. "Listen very carefully, Clara. Article 11, Section C. It looks like a standard clause about resolving the estate in case of an irreconcilable dispute. But Walter added one sentence. A single sentence, but it's a ticking time bomb." He cleared his throat and read aloud, slowly, deliberately, emphasizing every word. "In the event that an heir, identified as James Hayes, takes any legal action against the lifelong steward, identified as Mrs. Clara Hayes, and that action results in a court order to sell or divide the Walters Orchard property against the steward's written wishes, then 90% of the total proceeds from said sale or division shall be automatically transferred to the Shenandoah Valley Preservation Trust." The room was dead silent. I just sat there, my mouth agape, trying to process the full meaning of what I had just heard. The Preservation Trust. It was a non-profit Walter had helped establish, dedicated to protecting historic farmland from urban sprawl. Mr. Bennet took off his glasses, his eyes twinkling. "Do you see, Clara? It's a poison pill provision. It doesn't stop them from selling the farm, but it makes selling the farm financially pointless for the attacker. If they win the lawsuit, If they force a sale, they will only receive 10% of the $4.5 million. That's $450,000. It's not enough money to cover the legal fees for a lawsuit this complex, let alone build a resort empire. Walter, I whispered, speechless. He set the perfect trap, Mr. Bennett concluded. An unbreakable legal trap. He didn't just protect you, he taught the greedy a lesson. He turned their own greed against them. A feeling of immense relief and power washed over me. The weight I had been carrying on my shoulders for weeks seemed to evaporate. I was no longer a lonely old woman fighting a powerful force. I was the keeper of an impregnable fortress. I stood up, wiping my tears. So what do we do now, Bennett? Mr. Bennett stood up too, his face no longer worried, but filled with the resolve of a man going into a battle he knows he will win. Now we do nothing. We wait. We let the fox walk right into the snare. We let them file their lawsuit. We let them spend their money and their energy, and when the time is right, we will detonate the bomb Walter left behind. I nodded, a real smile spreading across my face for the first time in weeks. Walter, he always did love a game of chess, I said, a warm memory suddenly flooding back. And he was always thinking 10 moves ahead. This time is no different, Clara, Mr. Bennett said, placing a hand on my shoulder. This time is no different. Leaving his office, I felt like a new person. The afternoon sun seemed brighter, the valley air fresher. I wasn't just defending a piece of land anymore. I was honoring the love and foresight of an incredible man. I was going to see Walter's final masterpiece play out. The weeks after my meeting with Mr. Bennett passed in a strange sort of peace. It wasn't true peace, of course, but the dead calm before a hurricane, that eerie moment when the sky is still and the wind holds its breath. I lived in that calm with a newfound serenity. I no longer jumped when the phone rang or a car drove past. I knew about the fortress Walter had built, and that knowledge was a heavy anchor, keeping my soul steady against the churning undercurrents. I spent my time doing the things I loved. I tended to my rose garden, snipping away the dead leaves, breathing in the sweet scent of the coming blooms. I spent hours in the kitchen making new batches of apple butter, the smell of cinnamon and brown sugar filling the house, chasing away the chill of loneliness. I even started rereading Walter's old books, sitting in his worn armchair, feeling his presence in the pages. I was recharging, physically and spiritually, for the battle I knew was coming. And then, it came. One morning in early autumn, as the first maple leaves were beginning to turn a fiery red, a sleek black sedan pulled up to my gate. A man in an expensive suit, carrying a leather briefcase, got out and walked purposefully to my door. He wasn't a salesman or a delivery man, he was a process server. He handed me a thick manila envelope, his manner polite but cold. "Mrs. Clara Hayes," he said, "you are hereby served with a summons and complaint from the county court. You have 21 days to file an official response." I took the envelope, my hand perfectly steady. "Thank you," I said, my voice even. After he left, I took the documents into the kitchen. I set them on the table, next to my still steaming pot of coffee. I didn't rush to open them. I poured myself a cup, added a splash of cream, and then slowly sat down. The warmth of the mug seeped into my hands, a familiar comfort on a world-tilting morning. Finally, I broke the seal. Inside was a dense stack of papers filled with dry, complicated legal jargon, but I didn't need to read it all. I just had to scan the main headings. Petition to partition inheritance. Motion to compel sale of jointly held property. Plaintiffs, James Hayes and Amber Collins. Defendant, Clara Hayes. They had actually done it. They had officially turned our family's private pain into a public legal battle. I flipped through the pages, my heart heavy, not with fear, but with the sorrow of seeing my own son's name in bold print, pitted against mine on these cold documents. But then, I got to a section that made my blood run cold. Attached to the lawsuit was a document titled, Preliminary Report on Cognitive Capacity and Asset Management. It was signed by someone named Dr. Alistair Finch, a name I'd never heard, with the title Clinical Psychologist and Forensic Examiner. The report was 5 pages long, written in a falsely objective and scientific tone, but its content was pure poison. It listed a series of concerning indicators about my mental state, based on testimony provided by those close to Mrs. Hayes and concerned for her well-being. I read it in disbelief. Mrs. Hayes frequently exhibits signs of paranoia, believing that family members are conspiring against her. She displays an irrational and pathological attachment to inanimate objects and the past, refusing clear opportunities for economic growth, which suggests a decline in logical decision-making. There are reports of frequent forgetfulness of recent events and confusion of names, a classic symptom of age-related cognitive decline. Every sentence was a gross distortion, a cleverly disguised lie. Private conversations, a mother's worries, the simple habits of old age, Amber had twisted them all into evidence against me. She had turned my love into a sickness, my principles into senility. This wasn't just a legal maneuver, it was a cruel blow against my character, my dignity, my very identity. She didn't just want to take my farm, she wanted to take my sanity in the eyes of the world. A pure, cold anger rose up in me, extinguishing all sadness. This evil went beyond all limits. It was no longer about greed. It was pure, unadulterated cruelty. I picked up the phone and called Mr. Bennett. "I've been served," I said, my voice frighteningly calm. "They've made their move, and it's worse than we thought." "Bring the papers to my office immediately, Clara," Mr. Bennett said, his own voice tight with tension. An hour later, I was in his office. We went over the entire file together. When he read the report from Dr. Finch, Mr. Bennett had to take off his glasses and rub the bridge of his nose. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "The cruelty of some people truly knows no bounds. This is clearly a hired gun report. Alistair Finch. I've heard of his type. He's a pen for hire, willing to write whatever he's paid to." "What do we do, Bennett?" I asked. "They're trying to have me declared insane." Mr. Bennett looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw no fear. I saw the resolve of a seasoned old lawyer facing a challenge. "We fight. First, we'll demand an independent evaluation from a reputable expert appointed by the court. You are perfectly healthy, Clara, and no doctor with a conscience could say otherwise. Second, we will expose this doctor for the fraud he is in court. And third, we stick to Walter's plan." "Walter's plan?" "That's right," Mr. Bennett said, a mysterious smile playing on his lips. "We are not going to fight back aggressively at first. We will appear passive. In our official response, we will only issue a general denial of the allegations and request a formal mediation hearing before the case goes to trial. Let them think we're on the defensive. Let them think we're trying to buy time." "But why?" I wondered. "Why not hit them back with everything we've got right now?" "Because, Clara," Mr. Bennett explained, "a trap works best when the prey doesn't even know it's walking into one. We need them to be confident. We need them to be arrogant. We need them to think they're about to win. We are going to let them walk themselves right up to the edge of the cliff. The mediation hearing is the stage we need. It will be the place where you surrender." I looked at him, and I began to understand the profound strategy at play. This wasn't just a legal battle, it was a psychological chess match. For the next 3 weeks, Mr. Bennett prepared the paperwork on my behalf. Our response, just as he'd planned, was masterfully understated. It contained no fiery language, no powerful counter-evidence. It simply denied the allegations and expressed a desire to seek a peaceful and amicable resolution within the family through mediation. This reaction clearly pleased the other side. Amber's lawyer quickly agreed to the mediation, no doubt thinking they had backed a tired old woman into a corner and she was now looking for a way to negotiate and save face. The mediation was set for a Wednesday morning. I knew it would be one of the hardest days of my life. I would have to face my son in front of strangers. I would have to listen to baseless accusations. And worst of all, I would have to act out the part of a weak and broken woman. The night before, I couldn't sleep. I wandered through the house, touching the furniture, looking at the photographs. I stood for a long time before Walter's portrait over the fireplace. In the flickering firelight, his painted eyes seemed to look at me with encouragement and trust. "I can do this, Walter," I whispered into the darkness. "I won't let you down. I will defend our fortress." The next morning, when I arrived at the courthouse with Mr. Bennett, I was perfectly calm. I had put away my strong tweed blazer and instead wore a simple gray cardigan and a long skirt. I wore my hair down and put on no makeup. I wanted to look exactly as they expected me to look, a tired, heartbroken mother on the verge of collapse. When we walked into the mediation room, they were already there. James and Amber sat on one side of the table next to their young, confident lawyer. James wouldn't look at me. He kept his eyes fixed on the table, his hands clasped together. Amber, however, was the opposite. She looked me straight in the eye, a condescending look that was a mixture of false pity and unconcealed triumph. She was certain she had already won. The mediator, a stern-faced man in his 50s, began the session. The courthouse mediation room was cold and sterile. It held only a long wooden table, a few chairs, and bare, beige walls that offered no comfort. The air was thick with tension, a heavy silence broken only by the rustle of papers and a dry cough from Amber's young lawyer. I sat with my back straight, but I intentionally let my shoulders slump with a look of exhaustion. Mr. Bennett sat beside me, his face calm but his eyes, behind their glasses, were watchful and sharp. On the other side of the table, Amber was the picture of confidence. She sat tall, her hands placed neatly on the file in front of her, occasionally leaning over to whisper in her lawyer's ear, who would nod eagerly. And James, my son, he was like a shadow. He seemed to shrink into his chair, his gaze glued to the meaningless wood grain of the table. He avoided my eyes at all costs, as if a single glance from me would be enough to burn him. Seeing him like that, a part of my heart ached. He wasn't a monster. He was just a weak man, blinded by ambition and controlled by a ruthless woman. But that flicker of pity was quickly extinguished by the knowledge of what I had to do. The mediator, a Mr. Davenport, began with a flat, emotionless voice, summarizing the plaintiff's petition. He spoke of the heir's financial interests, the need to optimize asset value, and the legitimate concerns regarding my managerial competence. Every word he spoke, though he was just repeating the complaint, felt like a needle prick to my pride. Then he turned to Amber's lawyer. "Mr. Peterson, you may present your client's position." The young lawyer stood up. He spoke smoothly and confidently, clearly well rehearsed. He repeated all the arguments from the lawsuit, painting a picture of a stubborn, old-fashioned mother who, for selfish, sentimental reasons, was damaging her own son's financial future. He kept using words like decline, detriment, and uncooperative. "Mr. Davenport," Peterson concluded, "my clients, Mr. Hayes and Miss Collins, never wanted it to come to this. They attempted dialogue, they made reasonable proposals, but all their efforts were met with irrational refusal from Mrs. Hayes. We are here today with one simple wish, to find an equitable solution, and if necessary, we will ask the court to intervene to protect Mr. Hayes's legal rights." When he finished, Amber gave a slight nod, a picture of aggrieved decency. Then, it was our turn. Mr. Davenport looked at Mr. Bennett. "Counselor." Mr. Bennett cleared his throat, but instead of rising to deliver the sharp legal rebuttal I might have expected, he remained seated. He gave me a look, a meaningful glance, like a director giving an actor their cue. It was time. I took a deep breath, feeling the cold weight of the keys against my chest. I looked up, and for the first time, I looked directly at James. His eyes met mine for a fraction of a second before darting away. "Mr. Davenport," I began, my voice deliberately trembling. I let the real exhaustion and pain I'd been suppressing for so long seep out, coating every word. I don't know what to say anymore." I paused, bringing a hand to my mouth, as if to stifle a sob. The room was utterly silent. Every eye was on me. "I've spent my whole life on that farm," I continued, my voice thick with emotion. "I gave birth to James there. I built everything with my husband Walter from the ground up. Every tree, every stone. It's a part of me." I looked at James again, my eyes pleading. "I never wanted to hurt you, James. Everything I've done, it was only because I wanted to hold on to the memory of your father, of our family." James began to shift uncomfortably in his seat. He wouldn't look at me, but I could see his shoulders start to tremble slightly. I knew my words were getting to him. Amber saw it too. She placed a hand on James's arm, a gesture of ownership and control. "It's okay, honey," she whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. That single act gave me strength. I turned back to the mediator. "I'm an old woman, sir. I'm so tired of the fighting, of the lawsuits. I don't have the strength to fight anymore. I began to cry. Real tears, born from the genuine pain of having to perform this play in front of my son. But to them, they were the tears of a defeated, broken woman. I don't want to fight my only son, I said, through my sobs. He's all I have left in this world. If he really wants to sell the farm, if that's what will make him happy. I let the sentence hang. I buried my head in my hands, my shoulders shaking. The performance was at its peak. Mr. Bennet placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Clara, you don't have to do this," he said, his voice full of pity, playing his part to perfection. The mediator, Mr. Davenport, seemed moved. He looked over at James and Amber with a slightly reproachful expression. Perhaps we should. But Amber wasn't about to let sympathy gain a foothold. She looked at me, and for a split second, I saw undisguised contempt in her eyes, the contempt of a victor for the vanquished. Then, just as quickly, she masked it with a look of deep concern. "Clara," she said, her voice sickeningly soft, "we never wanted to hurt you. We only want what's best for the whole family. We're so glad you finally understand." James finally looked up. His face was pale, his eyes red. I could see the conflict in them, a flicker of guilt, but it was being overwhelmed by relief. The fight was over. He had won. He didn't have to be at odds with his mother anymore. "Mom," he started, his voice hoarse. "It's all right, son," I said, looking up, wiping my tears, forcing a weak smile. "I understand now. If you want to sell, then we'll sell. I agree." Those words were the final nail in the coffin of my resistance. Mr. Peterson couldn't hide his satisfied smirk. He exchanged a congratulatory glance with Amber, who gave a subtle, triumphant nod. Mr. Davenport seemed surprised by the sudden turn. "Mrs. Hayes, are you certain about your decision?" he asked, for the record. I just nodded, unable to speak further. I had played my part. "Very well, then," the mediator said. "I believe we have an agreement in principle. The parties agree to proceed with the sale of the joint property. The details regarding brokerage and valuation will be worked out by counsel. This mediation is concluded." He tapped his wooden gavel lightly on the table, a dry, final sound for a perfect performance. As we all stood to leave, Amber approached me. "I know this was a difficult decision," she said, her voice still dripping with false sympathy. "But believe me, it's the right one. You'll see." I didn't answer. I just gave her a blank stare. James came over too. "Mom, he hesitated. "I'll come visit soon." "There's no need, James," I said, my voice suddenly cold, all the tremor gone. "You have your life now, just go live it." I turned and walked out of the room with Mr. Bennet, leaving my son standing there, stunned by my sudden iciness. He had gotten what he wanted, but he was just beginning to feel the price. As we walked down the courthouse corridor, away from that suffocating room, I let out a long breath. My legs felt a little shaky, and I leaned on Mr. Bennet's arm. "You were magnificent, Clara," he said, his voice full of admiration. "Thank you, Bennet," I said, my voice tired. "But I think I might have truly lost my son in that room." "I know," he said, his voice softening. "But they have to pay for what they've done. To you, to the farm, and to your husband's memory." We stepped out into the sunlight, and for the first time in months, I felt a real glimmer of hope. The 2 weeks following the mediation were the strangest of my life. News that I had caved and agreed to sell the farm spread through our small town like wildfire. The phone calls started pouring in. My best friend, Mrs. Peterson, called immediately, her voice full of disbelief and concern. "Clara, is it true? You're really selling Walter's Orchard after you fought your whole life to keep it?" To my closest friends, I could only be vague. "Sometimes you have to make hard choices, dear. I'm just tired." My neighbors looked at me with a mixture of pity and disappointment. To them, Walter's Orchard was more than a farm. It was a landmark, a piece of the valley's soul. And now, its last sentinel had seemingly laid down her arms. I had to endure their looks, the whispers behind my back, and it hurt just as much as the accusations in the mediation room. But I knew the truth would come out soon enough. Meanwhile, Amber and James moved at lightning speed, as if they were afraid I might change my mind. Amber, with all the efficiency of a top real estate agent, finalized the arrangements. The investment group, Stonebridge Holdings, whom she had lined up months ago, immediately sent in their team of lawyers. Everything moved with a terrifyingly smooth efficiency. They weren't wasting a second. James would call me occasionally, his tone falsely cheerful. "Do you need help with anything, Mom? Have you started looking at places in Florida?" I would give him short, clipped answers, keeping him at a cold distance. I knew he was trying to soothe his own conscience, trying to believe he was doing the right thing for me. His naivete, whether real or self-induced, was no excuse. Finally, the day arrived. The day of the closing. That morning, I woke up very early. I didn't choose an outfit of mourning or defeat. Today was the day of truth, the day of Walter's justice. I chose a simple, elegant dress in a shade of royal blue, a color of peace and power. I put my hair up, wore my pearl earrings and the matching necklace Walter had given me. I put on makeup, light but careful. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see a beaten old woman. I saw Clara Hayes, wife of Walter Hayes, matriarch of Walter's Orchard. I was ready. The closing was held at a large, impersonal title company downtown. A cold, foreign place, the complete opposite of Mr. Bennett's cozy office. When we arrived, everyone was already there. The large conference room with its gleaming mahogany table was packed. On one side, our party, just me and Mr. Bennett. On the other side, a small army. Amber and James, their lawyer Mr. Peterson, and 3 representatives from Stonebridge Holdings, men in expensive Armani suits with smug looks on their faces. The atmosphere in the room was celebratory, at least on their side. Amber was the star of the show. She was radiant in a cream-colored pantsuit, a permanent smile fixed on her face. She moved around the room, shaking hands, laughing, as if she were hosting a gala. James sat beside her, looking more relaxed, a more genuine smile on his face. He was on the verge of grasping his dream. The thick contract was placed ceremoniously in the middle of the table. Everyone took their seats. The notary, an older man with a serious expression, began to read through the main terms of the agreement. He spoke of the sale price, $4.5 million, of the closing date, of the payment terms. With every word he read, Amber's smile grew wider. "All right," the notary said after he had finished. "If there are no further comments from any party, we can begin signing." He pushed the contract toward the representative from Stonebridge Holdings. The lead man, with salt and pepper hair and a flashy gold watch, smiled and picked up a gold-plated fountain pen. And that was the moment Mr. Bennett had been waiting for. "Hold on," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it was clear and commanding enough to make the entire room fall silent. All activity stopped. The man from Stonebridge froze, his pen hovering just above the paper. Amber whipped her head around to look at Mr. Bennett, the smile on her lips tightening slightly. "Is there a problem, Mr. Bennett?" she asked. Her voice laced with the irritation of someone whose moment has been interrupted. "Just a small formality," Mr. Bennett said, his expression perfectly calm. He opened his old leather briefcase and took out a document. It was a copy of Walter's will. "Before the parties put pen to paper, I feel it is my duty, as the executor of the late Walter Hayes' estate, to inform all present of a specific clause within the will, a clause that has a direct impact on the distribution of the proceeds from this sale." A tense silence fell over the room. Mr. Peterson frowned. "All relevant clauses have been thoroughly reviewed by our counsel, sir. I don't believe there are any ambiguities." "Oh, I'm quite sure you reviewed it very thoroughly, Mr. Bennett said with a faint smile. "But perhaps you missed one small detail. A detail Mr. Hayes intentionally placed where one might least expect it. Allow me to read it." He put on his reading glasses and turned to one of the final pages of the will. The entire room held its breath. I glanced over at James. A look of confusion was starting to creep across his face. Amber still held her confident pose, but I could see her fingers clenching together under the table. And then, Mr. Bennett's voice rang out, loud, clear, and firm, each word echoing in the silent room. Article 11, Section C. In the event that the heir, identified as James Hayes, takes any legal action against the lifelong steward, identified as Mrs. Clara Hayes, and that action results in a court order to sell or divide the Walter's Orchard property against the steward's written wishes, then. He paused for a dramatic second, his eyes sweeping across the room, before finishing the sentence with a voice full of authority. then 90% of the total proceeds from said sale or division shall be automatically transferred to the Shenandoah Valley Preservation Trust. If a real bomb had gone off in that room, the effect could not have been more explosive. For a moment, no one said a word. They just sat there, stunned, trying to process the information that had just been dropped. The man from Stonebridge was the first to react. He slowly put the pen down. The smug look on his face was gone, replaced by confusion and then anger. He turned to his own lawyer, whispering furiously. Mr. Peterson shot to his feet. "What? That's absurd. That clause is unenforceable." "Oh, I'm afraid it's perfectly legal and entirely enforceable, Counselor," Mr. Bennett replied calmly. "It was properly notarized and filed. Mr. Walter Hayes had every right to dispose of his assets in any manner he saw fit. And he decided that if his legacy was to be forcibly sold due to a family dispute, the majority of its value would serve the community's preservation." Amber's face had gone as white as a sheet. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Her expression shifted from shock to disbelief, and finally, to pure, unadulterated panic. She looked at James, but James was just staring at Mr. Bennett, his face ashen, as if he'd been struck by lightning. 90%? The Stonebridge representative mumbled. That would mean the seller's net proceeds would only be $450,000? Precisely, Mr. Bennett confirmed, without a hint of hesitation. And that, of course, is before taxes and legal fees. The trap had snapped shut, perfectly. The lawyer for Stonebridge Holdings stood up. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice cold, "it is clear that vital information was withheld from us. Under these circumstances, we cannot proceed with this transaction. This contract is void." And with that, the three men from the investment group packed their briefcases and walked out of the room without a second glance. The luxurious conference room was now the scene of a shipwreck. The multi-million-dollar dream had evaporated into thin air in a matter of minutes. Amber finally found her voice, but it wasn't her sweet, controlled voice. It was a shrill, piercing shriek of rage and hatred. "Fraud! This is fraud!" she screamed at me and Mr. Bennett. "You set us up." "We set no one up, Miss Collins, Mr. Bennett said, calmly gathering his papers. "We simply followed the last will and testament of a very wise man. Perhaps next time you should read the fine print before you try to ruin someone's life." All of Amber's pretense was gone. She spun around to face James, who was still sitting frozen in his chair, his eyes empty, and she unleashed all of her fury on him. "You're useless," she hissed, her beautiful face twisted in a mask of rage. "This is all your fault, you weak, spineless mama's boy. You ruined everything, you and your conniving old mother." She grabbed her handbag and then, in a fit of uncontrolled rage, she threw her car keys at him. They clattered loudly on the floor. "I wasted 2 years of my life on a failure. We're finished. Don't you ever try to find me again." And with that, she stormed out of the room like a hurricane, leaving a wake of shattered silence behind her. James just sat there, motionless, defeated, abandoned. He slowly bent down and picked up the keys. And then, he looked up at me. For the first time in months, he truly looked at me. And in his eyes I saw no anger. I saw only a vast emptiness, a brokenness, and a bottomless well of misery. He had learned his lesson, a lesson that cost him $4 million and a marriage. I stood up and, along with Mr. Bennett, quietly left the room. I didn't say a word to him. There was no triumph, no pity, just a profound, aching sadness. The rain that fell that night seemed to wash away some of the dust of the past, but the scars remained, etched deep in the souls of my son and me. James stayed. Not as an heir or a business partner, but like a refugee seeking shelter in the only place on earth left that would take him. The first days passed in a heavy, awkward silence. We moved around each other in the big house like two strangers forced to live together. He tried. Every morning he'd get up before me, make a pot of coffee, and then quietly go outside. I'd see him doing the hardest jobs we usually hired help for. He fixed the rotting section of the west fence, cut down the dead branches from the trees after the hard winter, and cleaned out the cluttered barn. He worked himself to the bone, from dawn till dusk, as if trying to atone for his sins with sweat and physical exhaustion. He said nothing, and neither did I. At that moment, actions spoke louder than any words could. We ate dinner together every night, but the meals were mostly silent. Occasionally, he'd look up, as if to say something, but then he'd just look back down at his plate. I knew he wanted to apologize again, to explain, to be forgiven, but I wasn't ready to hear it. Forgiveness isn't a switch you can just flip. It's a seedling that needs time to take root and grow in soil that has been torn apart by betrayal. I accepted his presence. I cared for him as a mother, but there was an invisible wall between us. The turning point came one afternoon, about 3 months after he returned. I was in the cider cellar, checking on the old oak barrels. It was Walter's most sacred space, where he had spent hours experimenting, creating the prized ciders that had made our farm famous. James appeared, hesitating at the doorway. "Do you need any help, Mom?" he asked quietly. "No, thank you," I said without turning around. But he didn't leave. He walked in, running his hand along the rough wood of the barrels. "I still remember," he said, his voice low, "Dad teaching me how to tell the difference between the scent of American and French oak. He said it was like the difference between a powerful rock song and a delicate symphony." He stopped at a small cask in the corner. This was the batch from the year I graduated college. Dad said he was saving it for my wedding day. That sentence was a needle prick to a wound that was still raw. Silence filled the cellar. "He was so proud of you that day," I said, finally turning to look at him. Tears welled up in James's eyes. "I let him down," he whispered. "I let you both down." "Yes," I said, my voice holding no accusation, only a simple, painful truth. "You did." He didn't argue. He just stood there and took it, accepting the truth of what he had become. How can I ever fix this, Mom?" he asked, his voice full of despair. I looked deep into his eyes, the eyes of the son I loved, now filled with anguish and regret, and I felt the wall of ice inside me finally begin to melt. "You can't fix the past, James," I said softly. "No one can. What's broken can never be exactly the same again, but you can build a different future, a future built on truth, on respect, and on the bitter lessons you've paid for." That was our first real conversation. It didn't heal everything at once, but it opened a door. From that day on, we started to talk more, not about what had happened, but about the now, about the work on the farm, about plans for the next harvest. Slowly, piece by piece, James stopped being a guilty shadow. He started offering ideas, started showing the knowledge of farming his father had taught him. He was finding himself again, not Amber's ambitious James, but Walter's Orchard's James. A few months later, I got a letter from Mr. Bennett. Inside was a small newspaper clipping. It was about Amber. After being sued by Stonebridge Holdings and losing her real estate license, she had gotten involved in another scam, taking deposits for homes from young families and running off with the money. This time, she didn't get away with it. The sentence was 3 years in prison. Her bottomless greed had finally swallowed her whole. I showed the clipping to James. He read it without a flicker of emotion, then set it down. "You reap what you sow," was all he said, and went back to his work. For him, that chapter was truly closed. Years went by, 5 years, long enough for new trees to grow and for the deepest wounds to begin to scar over. James never left the farm again. He became my right-hand man, and then, slowly, the main manager. He worked with a quiet humility, learning from the old-timers in the valley, who at first eyed him with suspicion, but eventually came to accept his change. On my 77th birthday, James surprised me. He gathered all my dearest friends and neighbors for a small, warm party in the very garden from which he had once banished me. During the party, in front of everyone, he stood up. "I know," he began, his voice trembling, "that on this very spot, years ago, I made an unforgivable mistake. I hurt the most important person in my life, and no apology will ever be enough." He turned to me, his eyes wet with tears. "But today, in front of everyone you love, I want to say one thing. Thank you, Mom. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for teaching me the most expensive lesson of my life, that true legacy isn't in deeds or dollar signs, it's in here." He placed a hand over his heart. "It's love, and it's sacrifice, and it's the chance to become a better man. He walked over and pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside was a silver chain, and on it, threaded with reverence, was the old key to the cider cellar. "I don't deserve the whole ring," he said, "but I'm asking if you'll let me keep this one. As a reminder of what's truly valuable and of the incredible woman who taught me that." The tears were streaming down my face, but this time, they were tears of pride and happiness. I hadn't just saved the farm, I had gotten my son back. Later that evening, after all the guests had gone, my son and I sat together on the old oak swing on the porch, watching the sun set over the valley, just like we had so many years ago. "Your father would be so proud of you, James," I said, resting my head gently on his shoulder. "I hope so, Mom," he said, his voice deep and warm. "I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of it." I looked out at the rows of apple trees, stretching to the horizon, the loyal soldiers of my family. Walter's fortress still stood, held up not by stone walls or legal clauses, but by a new generation, one who had learned its lessons from the ashes of the past. The ring of keys was still around my neck, but it no longer felt heavy. It was just a symbol now, a reminder that love, when paired with wisdom and strength, can overcome even the cruelest greed. And I knew that one day, not too far from now, I would be ready to pass it on, because the true heir of Walter's Orchard had finally come home. Use arrow up and arrow down to select a turn, enter to jump to it, and escape to return to the chat.